Thinking about self-publishing and don't know where to start? Join the Spa Girls each week for 30 minutes of honest advice, tips and resources. I'm Trudy J and I am here with Wendy Vella.
Hello.
Shah Barrett.
Hi there.
And Cheryl Phipps.
Hi.
And today we have a super exciting guest on the show, Lisa Cron.
Yay.
Say hello. Hi.
So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. We are so happy to have you. We're very excited. I've read all your books, done courses, everything, all of your wise words.
Yes.
So Lisa is what would you describe it? A story
coach.
There
coach.
we go.
Okay, there we go. Perfect. Okay, awesome. So Shara is just going to read a short bio and then we're going to get right into the interrogation.
Yeah. So
questions, I think you mean, Trudy.
Yeah,
questions. Sorry.
Let's not frighten our guests off so early in the piece, Trudy. So Lisa is a story coach, as she's just said, and the author of probably Trudy's and my one of our favorite books is called Wired for Story. We're going to make sure that all the links are in the show notes, by the way, people. But Wired for Story, the writer's guide to using brain science to hook readers from the very first sentence, and also Story Genius, which is another fabulous book, which is kind of going beyond outlining and to write a riveting novel. I'm a huge fan of Creative Live, as I've mentioned many times on this podcast, and Lisa has a wonderful 7-hour video class on Wired for Story. And she also has a Writing Fundamentals, The Craft of Story on lynda.com. Lisa has worked in publishing at W.W. Norton, as an agent at Angela Rinaldi Literary Agency. I apologise for mangling that with my Kiwi accent. As a producer on shows for Showtime and Court TV, which is super exciting as well, and as a story consultant for Warner Brothers and the William Morris Agency. Since 2006, she has been an instructor at the UCLA Extension Writers Program, and she's on the faculty of the School of Visual Arts MFA program in Visual Narrative in New York City. So we are just so excited to have you, Lisa. We're going to make sure all your links are in here, including links to your books and to your courses. But Lisa's website, just for now, because I know you guys are out there listening to this and writing things down, it's wiredforstory.com. So I hand it back to you, Treadles.
Awesome. So thank you for that. So you can all hear that Lisa is a genius, and because you wrote a book called Story Genius. So what I'd like to start with just breaking it down right to the very beginning. And so you have a very specific definition of story. So could we sort of maybe off the cuff, can you give us that definition and talk about that?
Absolutely. It'll probably take a bit. So I will start and I'll say it first and I'll say it slowly. The story is about how what happens affects someone who's in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal and how that person changes internally as a result, which is what allows them to either solve the problem or realize it was different than what they thought. And let me just say that one more time. It's about how what happens affects someone who's in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal and how that person changes internally as a result, and that allows them to either solve the problem or realize it's very different than what they thought it was to begin with. And if I could break that down in familiar writing parlance, so the story is about how what happens, and that what happens is merely, use the word merely on purpose, merely the surface of the story. It is not, and I can't say it strongly enough, it is not what the story is about. And yes, I'm talking about the plot. And if I leave you with nothing, it should be the story is not about the plot. As we'll see, stories about how the plot affects the protagonist. And that's why if it was up to me, and I know this is incendiary, both literally and figuratively, shouldn't be talking about fire in Australia, I don't think, but let's just talk about it figuratively. I would burn every copy of every story structure book from the hero's journey on up. Because for one, it's a complete misnomer because it's not story structure, it's plot structure, and the story is not about the plot. The story is about how it affects someone, about how what happens, that's the plot, affects someone. That someone is your protagonist, and your protagonist is your reader's avatar within the story. Think of story as a Vulcan mind meld. Everything that happens over here in the plot is going to get its meaning and emotional weight based on one thing and one thing only, and that is how it is affecting your protagonist. And I don't say this lightly. If I could just break into what I usually say at this point, I just finished writing another book that's going to be out in March called Story or Die. And so I was doing more of the research into like current, neuroscience and studies. And I came across one by a neuroscientist named Stephen Brown out of McMaster University. And he wanted to see, when we're pulled into a story, any story, from a novel to a play to a memoir to a headline, what part of our brain is activated first? What are we looking for immediately when we're pulled in? And he actually said this in the scholarly paper and then in the article that was written about him. He said he thought it was going to be what Aristotle said, right? It's plot first, character second. Totally not true. So the part when people were hooked up and then they were reading, it was something very short, like headlines, things like surgeon finds scissors inside patient. Like literally that was. The first thing that comes online is the part of your brain that mentalizes. And what that means is it is the part of your brain that goes to, whose story is this? Why does what's happening matter? What's their agenda? What do they want? What are they afraid of? What are they motivated by? The first thing we go to is exactly that. So in other words, think of it as that Vulcan mind meld. So it's how what happens affects someone, but not affects them in general, like a one-off, like affects them like, it's it's raining and hailing out there in the story, and your protagonist doesn't want to get wet. So instead of going out, she's going to stay home and have, cocoa and read a novel. It's how it affects your protagonist in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal. And that deceptively difficult goal is what's often known as the story problem, the plot problem, because stories are about really how we solve a problem. But deeper than that, stories are about how we have to change in order to solve a problem. All stories are about change. And here's the thing, all change is hard. Good change is as hard as bad change. In fact, good change can be harder than bad change. It is just as hard to leave home to get married as it is to leave home to get divorced. In fact, let's face it, sometimes it's easier to leave home to get divorced. So it's about that tough problem. So it's about how what happens, that's the plot, affects someone, that's your protagonist, in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal, that is that plot problem, the problem that's going to have to be solved throughout the story, and how that person, your protagonist, changes internally as a result. And it is that internal result that your story is actually about. In other words, as I said, your story is not about the plot. Your story is about how the plot affects the protagonist. Your story is not about what happens on the outside. It's not about an external change.
Yeah.
Story is about internal change, which is why when you think about it, because a lot of writers go, what do you mean my protagonist has to change? Change from what to what? Why should she change? It's like, aha. That's why all protagonists, all characters really, enter the story with two things already fully formed. A misbelief, something that was formed early in life, a misbelief about human nature, not some factual misbelief like, I thought the world was flat and never believe it. It's up and round. Or, I thought she was my sister and it turns out she's my mother. I mean, it could be something that certainly could be true in the story, but that's not what a misbelief is. It's a misbelief about human nature, something like the nicer people are to you, the more they're actually just trying to get to know you so they can use and abuse and manipulate you. That's the kind of misbelief we're talking about. So character enters with a misbelief that was formed early in life and something they really want and have wanted for a long time. And that's what sets their agenda, which is why all protagonists and really all characters, every character enters the story with a fully formed agenda that's scene by scene by scene by scene they are trying to bring to fruition. And that's why, kind of like, because I could talk for half an hour on this. When people talk about that narrative arc and they think it's the plot, it's not. Mm-hmm. Narrative arc is the internal narrative that your protagonist uses that evolves based on what happens to make sense of what's going on. And that's what I call your story's third rail. That's what gives meaning to everything that happens up here in the plot. Because we don't come for the plot. You know, because the plot is the surface, and we've all got the surface world figured out. We want to know what's going on beneath the surface, and that's what story does.
Yeah.
So as writers, when we criticise for having, or not we personally, but just in general, cardboard cutout characters, that's where the writer hasn't delved into that misbelief and that kind of agenda, if you like. It's that they're going through the motions of the plot.
Right. That's why people will come up, and that's why, I mean, this is also pretty incendiary, but, you know, writers are often asked, like, are you a pantser or are you a plotter? You know, pantser meaning writing by the seat of your pants. And I say, a pox on both your houses. I don't one work, because if you pants forward, it's like saying, I'm going to write a novel about the most important turning point event in someone's life who I know absolutely nothing about. Not only that, but there's so many layers of story that you have no clue of. And that's why, I mean, I think that that's actually why they say that out of 100 people who sit down to write a first draft, and we're just talking first draft now, only 3 make it to the end. Because they start writing and they go, I don't know what happens next. I don't know what that's going to be. And then they start writing really, really pretty, right? Or just write beautiful sentences. And they don't think, and you know, and that doesn't work. And when you plot something out, writers tend to begin with some sort of external trajectory of a bunch of things that are going to happen, which is how most novels turn into nothing but a bunch of things that happen. And then you've got to have characters who are inherently going to make those things happen. Why? I don't know. We don't come for what. We come for why. And so they become now what I like to call, I've published this anywhere, what I like to call plot enablers. In other words, the goal of every character is just to make that plot point happen. And then when writers do it, it starts to become like a race. Like, how fast can they get to each plot point and, you know, get to the end? And again, yeah, it's just a bunch of things that happen. I think it's why, you know, I think it's when Flannery O'Connor said, you know, the great Southern writer, and she once quipped in an interview, she said, I find most people know what a story is until they sit down to write one.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly why.
Yeah.
Because we're pulled into a story, again, brain science, when we're pulled into a story, you're really there. I mean, it has put a timeout on your biology, and what the protagonist is doing, it's traveling your same neural pathways. Your brain is lighting up as if you were doing what the protagonist is doing. You really are there. And the problem with the way that we come at story is we think it's logical or intuitive. We go, okay, well, what's actually pulled me in is the beautiful writing, right? And the plot. And it's actually neither one of these things. You know what the irony is? Is the thing that's actually pulled you in is a lot of what the writing world tells you not to do, which is why I'm very fond of saying, I think everything you've been taught about writing is wrong. And if the writing world were a person, meaning the instructing world, I'd punch it in the nose.
I love that.
So angry to see that what really is what pulls us in is what writers are literally told not to do. What they really mean is don't do it poorly. And yeah, don't do it poorly. But the two things that really pull us in are backstory, which is the most fundamental layer of story. Without backstory, you have no story. And, you know, and internality, character thinking about things, not thinking about things like going down memory lane or just musing or just, but they're in every scene, you know, your point of view character, your protagonist has to make a tough decision. In order to do that, they got to figure out what to do, just like all of us, right? All, you know, we don't want to be vulnerable. It's like that saying, I'm sure that you've heard, that, you know, never let them see you sweat. And what does that imply? It implies on the surface, it looks like everything is fine. And beneath the surface, you're sweating buckets. That's what's about how we make decisions, internal logic. That is that internal narrative. And that comes from both, again, internality and backstory. I just finished reading a nonfiction book, obviously by a neuroscientist, literally called Your Brain is a Time Machine. And the point is, the premise of it, and you know, the point is that your brain has one job. What your brain's job is, the reason we have a brain, is to record past memory in order to predict the future. That is what we do. That is what each one of us is doing every minute of every day. And if your characters aren't doing that, you got nothing to teach us, and you got nothing to put us into that Vulcan mind meld of, oh my gosh, what are they going to do next? Because it's not just that we want to know what they're going to do next. What we really want to know is, why are they going to do it?
Yeah.
Why are doing it. It looks like this on the surface. The real reason is this thing underneath, the thing that we all keep hidden. Because we
So I'm going to interrupt you there because I want to go back and like go a bit deeper into a couple of different things. I apologize. I think my cat's going to be making noise next to me, but hopefully I can ignore it. So one is if we can talk a little bit about the misbelief and then how we create, like you talk about the backstory and you have some specific stuff about how to, you know, not to create all the backstory, which is what some authors do, but just to create the specific backstory. So can you delve a little bit deeper into the misbelief and how we do that?
Yeah. Absolutely, and I'll use that example I was going to give. I mean, a misbelief, as I said, is something about human nature, about how we treat each other. And misbeliefs always come in early in life. And the reason is because that's when we're trying to figure out how things work. I mean, you may have heard of, there was an American psychologist named Abraham Maslow, and he talked about, you know, our pyramid of needs. And he says at the top is, you know, connection and sense of purpose. And at the bottom, he says the first thing we need, our basic needs, are food, water, shelter. And that is not true. Because what we need before that, when we're babies and children, is someone who cares enough about us to give us those things, right? Because if you're a baby or a kid, you can get food, water, shelter by yourself. You know, if your parents walk out, you're kind of out of luck. So from the time we're small, we're trying to figure out how the world works. Not to sound completely transactional, but we're trying to figure out what do I need to do in order to get my needs met. So that misbeliefs, and we've all got them. I cannot tell you how many writers I've worked with who've said, I was looking for my protagonist's misbelief and I found my own.
Yeah.
Got them. And they come in so early. Of course, we don't think of them as a misbelief. We think of them as a very savvy piece of human nature that we're super lucky to have learned early on. So the misbelief, I mean, once you've figured out when you're writing, again, writers usually have some idea of what their story is going to be, you know, a bit of an idea of what the premise is, which of course would be the first thing. I call it a what if that you would come up with. But then the real question is, given what's going to happen in the story, why would it matter to your protagonist? What is it going to challenge in them? And then when you develop this kind of backstory, you're doing it story specifically. You're going back, and I won't go into all the steps you would go to get to this misbelief, but you'd figure, okay, this is the thing that's kept them from getting what they want, and that scene by scene by scene by scene, they're going to be forced to overcome by what's going to happen in the plot. The plot being something really very often that they brought on themselves, not in a, you know, finger waggy way like you'd say to your kid, you brought that on yourself, but, you know, the unintended consequences of the choices that they've made. So a misbelief, and if I could take, this will take a couple minutes, if I could I'll give you an example. And it would be, let's imagine, you know, that our protagonist is going to be 29 when the story starts. And back when she was 9, she came from a very dysfunctional family. You know, I don't know what a functional family actually is. Dysfunctional family. She's got a single mom, no dad in sight, a feral sister, and she just feels completely alone and unseen. And she wants what we all want. She wants some kind of connection. She wants to be valued for who she is. So at school, there's a group of girls, and they're about to start this club about this little Japanese anime character who she loves. And they say, okay, you know, we're going to start the club, and in order to get into it, you have to have a doll, this little Japanese anime doll. And she goes, great, I have enough time. I'll save up the money. I'll buy it, and I'll be with a group that is going to be my tribe. She saves up the money. Day before the club is going to start, she opens her bank, and it's empty. And now she's just bereft. I mean, the one chance she had, and now it's gone, and what's the point? And she's sobbing. And a couple hours later, her older sister comes in, and she says, you know, I know that we don't really talk, and you haven't told me much, but you were so upset, and I asked around, and I know what's going on at school, and I know about the club, and I, you know, from I can tell that your money is probably gone because that's why you're so sad. Probably brother, you know, so sad. So I took my money, and they bought you an even bigger doll. Now, at this point, the protagonist is thinking, I don't need those girls anymore. She sees me. She knows me. I didn't even have to ask her. You know, she knew what it was, and she went on her own and got me the very thing I needed, which I actually think in life that is the best thing you can ever get, which is somebody anticipates your needs and gives it to you before you have to say anything. I mean, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, no.
She's really feeling that. And then her sister says, but you know, I spent all my money on this doll and I'm going out with Ralph tonight. And if I don't pay, he's going to dump me. And Mama's not giving me my allowance since I crashed the car. And you know that wasn't my fault. And she's got that $100 bill in her purse. And I know it's for food, but I'm not hungry and you don't even eat that much. If you could just go in and distract her. I just want you to distract her for a minute. And at that moment, the protagonist is like, when we talk about an aha moment, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm sure she went back and thought of other similar things that had happened in the course of her life. And she realizes, wait, you didn't do this because you cared about me. You did this to get me to help you steal from Mom. In fact, I think I know where my money went.
Yeah.
Right? At that moment, that is adaptive. That is an adaptive that was good, that helped her, right? Probably helped her navigate a very unhappy family life from that moment on. But the conclusion that she drew was, well, the nicer someone is to me, the more they're trying to use and abuse me. Here's the thing, when you're as an adult, for any of us, if we met someone and there was a simpatico, we're not talking about a romantic relationship, but you feel like, oh, this person knows me, we'll be friends for life. And then they say, oh, by the way, I'd like you to invest in this land I've got out here. And I know immediately you think, okay, wait a minute. This person is a jerk. But I have all sorts of friends and great people over there. I'm getting this person out of my life. When you're a kid, you don't think this person's a jerk. You think this is how the world is. Now, while that misbelief helped her survive her family life, it probably really screwed her up in the rest of her life because she's going to misread the intentions of her teachers at school, any romantic relationships, any thought, all the way through. And of course, what that person wanted, what did she want? She wanted connection. She wanted to be seen and valued for who she was. And now she feels like anyone who wants to know that is only going to try to use and abuse me. Obviously, this misbelief is keeping her from getting what she wants. It's not protected. She thinks it's protecting her, but it's not. And then that would, we have time to go through all of it now, but that would ricochet through her life. It wouldn't stay the same from that moment to 29. In fact, from the minute she's 9, it would be challenged. Life would push up against it. And so that misbelief, it would grow, it would escalate, it would complicate, it would pick up supporting misbeliefs until by the time, she was shoved onto the page at the age of 29, she's not thinking it like a bumper sticker. It's been absorbed into her worldview, and it's literally how she makes every decision. And so that is going to be challenged, by what's going to happen up there in the plot, which also do this story specific work, and the plot begins to auto-populate the same way, with any of us. If we thought about, this is one of those things that because of COVID doesn't work the way it used to, because now no matter what we thought was going to happen in this coming year, we're like, wrong.
Yeah.
But think about, like when 2019 was starting, and when you stood on New Year's Eve of 2019, you had what you were going to do that year. You knew you wanted to have happen. You knew you were afraid was going to happen. Think about all the balls in your life that were in play, not just you, but the way your significant other would have related to it, your kids, your dog, your boss, your next door neighbor. All of that was already there. The same thing is true of your protagonist, but by looking at it this way, you're creating what the plot's going to be. The last thing you ever want to do is do one of those birth up until when the story begins bios, because they are just as general and about this happened and then that happened and then that happened as the plots that they then spur. So that's the answer.
That's the answer. Also, because what I really like about that is, sorry, Cheryl, just one thing, because I started using them, like creating the misbelief, and then you have the one thing that they really, really want that they come into a story with, and and they conflict directly. Like it's not just there's this one thing over here they want, and then there's this misbelief over here. They have to be in connection, exactly like you were just, one and the same. And I've done it, and it does kind of create the plot. Like it does work like that. So I can, not that you needed me to back you up, but I'm just. And I tried it and it did work in my own thing. Sorry, Shah, what were you going to say?
So my question is, if you've got a recurring character, so for example, if you're writing, say, a mystery series and you've got the character that's following through, and I think you've already answered it actually, where that misbelief kind of morphs into maybe other ones or kind of catches on to other ones. Is that how you carry it off? I mean, none of us get it right as in in human terms, you know what I mean, a one and done deal.
Right. I mean, I think it depends on the type of, if you're talking about a mystery and that, a detective or, whoever the person who's solving the crime would be. Yes, to a certain degree, it goes through. It's not if they have a misbelief or something they've struggled with. Like if you think of Adam Dalgleish, his wife has died and he can, I think in one of the last novels, he finally gets together with someone. But that pain that's caused him to write the poetry. And so that always, comes through. Or if you think of, my mind is blanking on both of them. On Elizabeth George's detective Lindley, his backstory is he was from like some sort of peerage or nobility, and he's throwing that aside to come and be a cop. So that's always kind of there. Sometimes with detectives on that level, we just go deeper. The woman who wrote, is it A.A. Moline? Who wrote Kinsey, A is for alibi, and my mind is blanking on her name and her detective, but she said, Sue Grafton, and she said that as she got deeper, she knew Kinsey better, so she could go into more why Kinsey was doing what she was doing.
Yeah.
So is it about going deeper? Yeah.
Yeah. And with mysteries, I mean, the thing that pulls us into mysteries, think about it, we just don't want to know, okay, who did it? We want to know why. We're always looking for the why. So you do have that in a mystery where you've got something like, James Bond, who doesn't really, I guess, count on that level, but like Philip Marlowe or Dashiell Hammett, who are never going to change, in any way. But the people who they're diving into, we're going into that deeper, why did they do what they, why would someone do it? Because that's what we want to know. I mean, yeah. And sometimes, like I said, with series, if you're doing a series of romance, it does, because with any kind of misbelief that gets pulled away, there's something new and green and fresh beneath it now. And now how's that going to go forward? Yeah. So that is, it tends to give birth to something else.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
That's exactly my question I had, because I've got a urban fantasy series, and I'm like, well, there's no mystery to answer the question of, well, kind of is actually when I think about it. But anyway, so it's that why. It's like you still want to know the internal happenings of those characters. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what we come for. With every character, we come not for the what, but for the why. Because that's where it's that. And people go, what's the story logic? The story logic isn't the plot. The story logic is the logic by which your protagonist is making sense of things. It doesn't mean it's literally logical in the sense of the way the external world would view logic, but it makes logical sense to the character as they're trying to figure out what to do. Like two great examples, I think, to state odd ways of logic is one, there's a book called Perfect Days by, I think it's Rafael Montez, I think is his name, and it's about a psychopath, and we're in the head of a psychopath all the way through. So we're seeing, how does a psychopath make sense of stuff? Like he's this young guy, I think he's 20, and he falls in love with someone, and he does what we all do when we fall in love with someone. He stalks her, he gets her alone, he knocks her out, he wraps her up in carpet, he takes her to a hotel. Right? I mean, that's what you do, right?
Yeah, totally.
In his head, or the other, going in a completely different direction, tonally anyway, is the Rosie Project. Which is, I never can remember the Graham, and I don't
Graham
remember.
Simpson. Is it Simpson or Simpson? It's a sin.
That's all I remember. It spells Graham in a way that we don't spell it here. So, but it's about a high functioning professor with Asperger's who decides, in order to really make his career work, he has to get married. So he's going to find he has a wife project, and the book's called But we're in his head. And sometimes we're thinking, because things happen to him, that if it happened to you or me, we would be like so deeply mortified that we'd be like under the bed, and it just rolls off his back because of the Asperger's. And you're thinking, maybe that wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah.
Mortified. But again, what pulls us into both those books isn't what happens. It's the way he's making sense of what happens that pulls us in. Yeah. And that's all true. Whether it's a psychopath or somebody high functioning Asperger's, or your next door neighbor, it's never the what. It's all the why.
Because I've seen when we talk about, especially with romance, they talk about having an external conflict and an internal conflict, and kind of what you're saying is that you need to make sure, or that they're joined, that the internal conflict.
Yeah, I mean, the one touches the other. The external conflict only gets its meaning because it touches that internal conflict. I mean, I love to say I had a student at UCLA once who said, she said, I know on the surface I look really put together, but inside I'm a raging mess and I'm trying to keep all of you from seeing it. It's like that, what's happening outside is stoking that raging mess. Because all of us, I mean, what are we all scared of? We're all scared of showing people who we really are. I mean, it's terrifying because they could not like you or tell you that you're stupid or laugh at you, God forbid. I mean, that's the problem. So as writers, we want to come in and see that vulnerability as readers, because that's where we get those Me Too moments. You know, I feel that way too. I thought I was the only one who thought that. I thought thinking that made you an idiot or made me some weird person. And now I realize it's all of us, and I actually have a tribe out there. That's what we have to see. But without that, we don't have everything. In other words, it's organic. It isn't. Another big mistake that writers will make is they'll want something external, dramatic to happen. So they go to some external grab bag of objectively dramatic things and they'll throw them in. And the answer to anything that's ever going to happen in your story, it's buried in your story's backyard. It's right there. If you're picking some other arbitrary thing because it seems dramatic, stop, put that back down, and go into your story and your characters and their backstory and who they are, and what they would do and why. And if you've done this work well, because, I mean, as I'm fond of saying, all stories begin and medias res, meaning in the middle of the thing. The first page of your novel is the first page of the second half of your story. When you've developed this first half, and when we're talking about like what I call the origin scene, which would be where that misbelief came from, it's not something you'd sum up or say in a paragraph or a simple declarative sentence. You would write that as a scene with, I think, even probably more depth than what you would have right now in the novel. It's not something that can be summarized. Nothing should ever be summarized, actually, unless you have the specifics already there 100%. Then you can go because you've got the specifics. But you would write it in great detail. It's not pre-writing. It's not research. This is the novel. As Faulkner so brilliantly said, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past. It is what we use in the moment to make sense of what's going on, which is how backstory comes in. It comes in service of the decision or the situation the protagonist is in the moment. And the reason you don't see it on the page is because you've been taught that backstory is it stopped the story and now I'm going to tell you something, blah, blah, blah. And that is not, in fact, I'll tell you a quick story. The way that I started to realize this was about 15 years ago now. And I was teaching at UCLA and a student said, if I want to put like my character's thoughts on the page, how do I do it? Do I put quotes? Do I put it in italics? And I literally thought, I don't know. I have no idea. Now you'd think, right? Now you and I'd read thousands of manuscripts, thousands. How come I didn't know? Like I literally drew a complete blank. I thought, okay, I'm going to go and I'll look and see, because we know that there's tons of it. And when I dove in, I realized you don't have to do any of that. No italics, and certainly no quote marks. We are in that character's head all the time. That's what gives us that 3D vision of you are really there. It's just because it's being used as the character's making sense of what's going on. You haven't stopped the scene. You're in the character's head in the scene as they're trying to figure it out. It's there. I had one client who said, she said, I want to see this. Like, not that I don't believe you, but she said, I took a highlighter and she was reading Sharp Objects, which is Gillian Flynn, who wrote Gone Girl. That's her first novel. And she said, I decided to highlight everything that was like, backstory and internality. She said, I'm halfway through the book and I've highlighted 60. That's 60% of it. Mm-hmm. It's all backstory. Backstory is a fundamental layer of story because it's the most fundamental layer of your life. How do you think you make sense of things? You make sense of things not based on some external objective meaning of something. Everything is subjective. You make sense of things based on what your past experiences told you those things mean. And I think we've got, very sadly, a great meaning, it's a perfect example, not that it's great, example of it right now is look at, I don't know what you guys have going on there, but look at our country in America and look at the way people are at polar opposites looking at the same thing and reading not only vastly different meaning into it, but like mutually exclusive meaning into it. And there's a few instances when one side can agree that there are actually facts. It's scary. And the meaning into it comes from what their past experiences taught them, not something that's intrinsically within that fact or that experience.
Because that's how we look at the world, right? We look at it through our own perspectives and our own.
What else do we have?
Yeah.
I mean, everything comes through our senses, you know. I mean, how else would we ever know anything? That's the trouble of coming up with a plot. And like you were saying, when you get cardboard characters, they become a generic person. What the writer thinks any person would do in that situation. And that's boring. Who cares? You know, there can be no subtext even, because it's just, you know, it's all utterly surface. And plus, at that point, because there is a plot already, that person's goal is just to ring those bells, you know, so they don't even become necessarily a good cardboard character, because they're still doing something in chapter 3 that means they'd never do that thing over there in chapter 12. But that doesn't happen, then the plot doesn't work. So
it's almost not even just about, because we talk about keeping a character consistent, like, you know, they don't do something in chapter 5 that they clearly showed from chapter 1 they would never do. This is about actually knowing how they view the world, and actually creating every situation they get into is done based on how they view the world, which is a whole...
But when you think about every situation they get into, it isn't like, I mean, you want to be careful that it isn't like this situation, and now here's another situation over here, and now here's a situation. It's one thing. You're talking pure cause and effect trajectory. That's why once you kind of know what it is, it's an evolving situation. There's no situation that's separate from it on that level. That's why when you dive into this, it's like giving yourself, in a good way, guardrails. You know, you can't suddenly go, but what about this thing over here that might happen? Or what about this? Or wouldn't it be cool? This once happened to my Uncle Ned, and I think it would be really funny if I mean, you stop doing that. And don't do that thing that writers will often do, which is, well, my character has a lot of empathy, so I'm going to show her over here being really kind to a lost dog. The lost dog has nothing to do with anything, but now we know she's got empathy. I could never do that. I mean, it needs to be expressed within this cause and effect, because that's what we're here for. That's why and there are methods out there that, what is it, the index card method? You know, write down every scene you think might be in, and then move them around until you've got it. It's like, if you can move scenes around, you don't have a story, because, you know, stories like life are cause and effect. If this, then that. If this, therefore that. If this, the ramification is that. Once you know what that is, it becomes really easy. I mean, and that's the only part of it that is, because writing is hard. I mean, let's face it. You know, there's the other thing, it's easy, or NaNoWriMo, or, you know, I mean, it's hard. It is hard. It's hard, and you've got to be willing to open up and go to a place where you're feeling the pain. If you're not feeling a little bit of pain, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing it right, by definition.
Don't say that. Oh my God. One thing that we wanted to talk about was the concept of writing ugly, like that, and it's kind of ties into that writing is hard thing about how it doesn't come out perfect. Can you talk a little bit about that, please, Lisa?
I mean, this is like when I said, you know, I punched the writing world in the face. I'd like to find the person who coined the word wordsmith, and I would, I'd be in jail for sure if I. When people talk about writing, it's one of the reasons that writing is taught wrong from literally kindergarten up, is because it's as if it's about writing or about words, and it's not. It's about having a story to tell. And the problem that writers often have is because writers tend to be voracious readers, and you tend to have read stuff that are really great and wonderful. That part of your brain, the part that wants to protect you, right, the part with the misbeliefs, is really there because it's trying to keep you safe. That, you know, anyone who's nice to you is trying to use you. Your brain latched onto that, and it kept that all the way through your whole life, because it was trying to protect you, right, to keep you from people who are going to abuse you. Same thing when you're reading tons of, you know, wonderful books that you love, and that part of your brain is looking at what you're writing there on page 1 or anything, going, that sure didn't read like that. You sure you want to show that to anyone? What's wrong? Oh my God. It thinks it's doing you a favor, that mean voice. It's not. It's not. Because the goal is to get down here into what the story is really about. It is not about writing pretty. It is not about ever using $25 words. Like, don't ever even do that. I once worked with a lawyer who was writing a novel, and he said, he was a trial lawyer, and he said, I learned early in my career, the bigger the word, the less emotion it conveys. And it's so true. The simplest, plainest prose pack the most meaning, because prose gets its power from the story that it's telling. And the story really means from that internal struggle that your character, your protagonist is going through in the moment, on the page, as they're struggling with what to do. And you want to let us in on that. Not try to write, well, one thing I would say to writers off the board, forget metaphors. Do not write metaphors. When you are writing a first draft, no metaphors, no similes, nothing really pretty. Don't even try it. Don't try to polish it. At the end of the day, the story polishes the prose, not the other way around. You know, at best, you end up with what's known in the trade as a beautifully written, who cares, right? A perfect end, so what? Because what makes us care is not beautiful writing. What makes us care is the meaning that that writing is meant to convey. So it's really important to let yourself go down. And in the beginning, when I work with writers, because that's what I do as a coach, and often, I mean, what separates the people I work with from the people I don't is the people I work with are, as I like to, if you ever saw that movie, the musical, The Music Man, where he sings about, you know, Marion the librarian, he goes, a sadder but wiser girl for me. And for me, it's like the sadder but wiser writer for me, who knows that you need to go back and plumb this stuff first. And when you're first going in and creating, say, an origin scene, or you know, whatever would happen after that, as that misbelief is now ricocheting through the person's life, the goal isn't to write it pretty. The goal isn't to get it right. The goal is to dig down into the meaning so you can ask more questions. Why? How? What would they do? What belief is this challenged? What are they going to come out now believing? How has this changed them? What conclusion have they drawn? Because that's a place where writers always go AWOL, which is a big thing happens, and then the character doesn't draw some conclusion that plays forward. That's what we come for. And the other thing about writing ugly, and why it can be doubly difficult, especially for writers who have had a lot of, I don't know what word to use, to, you know, who've read a lot of books on writing, who've, you know, taken a lot of what, is that it forces them to do the things that they've been told not to do. That can make them feel like they're bad writers. That can make them, like, I've had writers say to me, putting in thoughts, it feels so clunky. I was told not to do that. I was told it was the reader's job to figure it out. It's not. Think about it. If there's something really specific going on inside someone, how can the reader ever figure it out? All they can think of it in general, and even if they come up with something specific, how would they know if it was true or not? The general just sits there. It's got no legs. It can't do anything. It is only the specific that takes us forward. And that's what you need to create. But it's not easy. And it, you know, it's a messy, iterative process. And it's not linear on the level of you start on page 1 and go forward. It's a lot of back and forth. But once you've got that, it is amazing what you can then end up doing. It gets so much easier as you go, you know, toward the end.
Because that's what you're talking about there is also, you talk about ways to add emotion into a book, and a lot of the rules that we're given, like I was at one point trying to just have body language and showing how they're all, and I read your book, I was like, oh my God, I don't have to do that anymore, because that was hard. And
talk about that for 1 minute, because body language is so overrated. In fact, I have something on body language in Wired for Story that I would really pull down if I was rewriting it, or because body language is totally overrated in prose. Body language works like when you're watching a movie, right? Someone can really convey something with a facial expression or their tonality. In body language in a book, not only is it clunky almost always, but it's generic. It's like you can't give us anything deep with it. You can just let us know in some really beautiful way that somebody is sad. You can't let us know why. Sometimes body language, and I think I did say this in Wired for Story, it's true, if it's showing us that something is the opposite of the way it seems and the character can't say anything, like someone's going, I am perfectly content with this, and their foot is just, you know, going like this, sort of shaking because they're really nervous. It's like, oh, okay, now you've told us something. But you also don't get emotion onto the page by talking about emotion. The way you get emotion onto the page is via this inner struggle, is just what the character is struggling with doing in the moment that they can't say. They never have to mention an emotion or even how they feel. It's that knowing that they're in that struggle and hearing it, something like, oh my gosh, my spouse isn't here and he promised he'd be here, but that the way the neighbor next door looked at him, and I think maybe he did take her garbage out the other day, and I'm hearing noises from over there, and my mother's going to come in. Oh my God, when she's now again, and I haven't even gotten to the deeper part. No emotion was mentioned, yet you know what that character's going through, because it is that struggle that evokes the emotion within the character and evokes the emotion within us. In other words, the struggle makes us feel the emotion that the protagonist is feeling. That is how you get emotion on the page. It never has to be mentioned. And body language, again, that body language, and like her heart was pounding or her palms were sweating. It's like we don't want to know that her heart's pounding or her palms are sweating. We want to know why. It's always about why.
Is there a time that you can do too much of that though? Like, can you overdo it?
But again, it's about they're making a decision in that moment. See what I mean? I mean, in other words, sure, of course. I mean, you can do anything poorly, for sure. And you can go on and on. My advice always is overdo it in the beginning. That's what the delete key is for. But yeah, I mean, yes, you can overdo it. But if you do it right, and once you get it into your bones, you don't tend to overdo it, because the reason the character is struggling is because there's something happening in the moment with urgency that they've got to make that decision. It's not like they could spend 6 months just musing about it because this big awful thing is going to happen. They got to make some decision. Am I gonna run over my dog, in 6 months or not? And then you don't have 6 months of them just thinking about it. It would be in that moment. Oh my God, if I don't run over my dog, they're going to think I'm blah, blah, blah. What do I do? It's a quick thing. So, I mean, anything can be done poorly or too much of. But, start looking. My advice always is take whatever book you're reading, get out that highlighter and start highlighting it. And you'll start to see that even, first person, third person, you realize that even, because writers are often told another, big mistake that writers make is they're told, give us that sense of place. So you start throwing things in just so we could see what the place is like, because that's what the place is like. The reader doesn't care. They just care about it in terms of the way in which it's affecting your protagonist, in what your protagonist is seeing, the meaning that's being, read into it. It's like, and I won't read them to you, right now, but if there's a book called The Silent Wife, and in the first paragraph of that, the writer talks about the view that the main character sees out her window, but she's using that to say about how the view makes her feel and what her life is like. Same thing with the first couple paragraphs of The Pilots. This is a hard thing to do, so I'm not suggesting any first-time writers do it, but it's there because it's mirroring for us the meaning that the character is reading into it. The last thing you want to do is go, well, the walls were yellow and the rug was red. Well, why did you tell me that? Well, I just told you because the walls were yellow. It's like, I don't care. Show me something that matters. The same way with all of us, right? All of us, every minute of every day, walk into a place and we want whatever our agenda is to be successful, and we want to be safe. And the things that we notice are things that have meaning to us, and things, especially in a story, that we're not sure if they're safe, but that then do make us feel safe. That's the meaning that's written in. And you notice, when you're reading something, and even if it's third person, and it's saying, well, and June walked in and she was wearing that hideous red sweater again. It's not the writer telling you that in the writer's opinion it's a hideous red sweater. It is that point of view character, and there's some reason for it, as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, everything spins off of that. And once you know what that is, then you have the yardstick. You have that meaning. You're inside that character, so you know them almost as well as you know yourself, and you know how they're going to be reacting, because you know what they want. You know the meaning they're reading in. You know what they're going to misread, which is always, the most important, because we misread stuff. I have to tell you the honest truth, especially reading brain science, I'm surprised when we ever actually understand what someone else actually means when they actually
Yeah.
I think even half the time when we think we do, like, we're so deeply wrong, But that's what we're always doing. I mean, we're always wondering, what are they thinking? Do they like me? Do they not? And people go, oh, you're insecure. And it's not being insecure. It's because we have no other way of knowing, and we don't know if we're safe or not unless we can figure out, what someone else's motives are and what they want, how what we're saying is landing one way or another.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
And when we're
Yes.
reading a book, we feel like, as a reader, we're experiencing those things with the character at the same time, which is
Absolutely.
an interesting thing. I kind of go back now and I'm like reading these books and go, oh my God, that's why I like this book, because I'm experiencing the same emotions and same. You talked about something interesting to do with show and tell, and we're always told, show versus tell, you should always show and describe things, which is kind of opposite to, yeah.
Not what it means. Totally wrong. Biggest mistake writers, don't tell me it happened, show me. So then they show us like we're watching a movie with the sound off. It does not mean show me physically what happened. It means show me internally why it happened. Show me the inside. That's what show don't tell means. It just don't tell me what somebody concluded. Put me inside their skin and show me them experiencing it internally, not feeling wise, but meaning the logic that they're reading into it. That's what show don't tell means. It does not. The biggest mistake writers make is they'll give us that some big long external rendition of something where I'm not in anyone's skin, because otherwise it's just this big giant objective thing out there, and we literally don't care. We can't feel anything. It's literally show me why, and the why is that internal. What is that meaning that the character's reading in, and why are they doing the next thing that they're going to do? Why are they taking it that way? Because as we know, in literature as in life, they're often taking it the wrong way. And I don't mean taking it the wrong way, like, oh, they're so sensitive, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, they're misreading it.
Mm.
So if we use that example, the misbelief that you had earlier about the girl who believes that everyone that's being nice to her is actually trying to get something from her.
Right.
And if we were showing versus telling on that, because and that was part of when I'm talking about show versus tell, I was thinking that's also to do with the body language thing. That was an attempt to show, not tell, and that was completely wrong. So if you've got someone who has that belief and you're trying to show it internally, how does that work? Can you explain that?
It's what they're reading in. In other words, it's the way that she would therefore be making sense of it in the beginning, sort of, as I said, in a very heavy-handed way. That notion of my sister, and again, I can't go into great graphic detail because, these are just characters that only exist right here in the way that we're talking about. But, in the beginning, it is that moment where she has that aha moment where logic changes, where she goes from, what we said in the beginning when her sister says, I got this for you, it's, it's even bigger. And she's thinking, my sister, I didn't think she cared about me. She really does. Oh my gosh, I don't need those girls in school. And she's we're friends, we're here, we're this, she sees me, she gets me, this matters to me so much. Maybe she's thinking a little bit about her sister in that way. Now I don't need them, I can tell those girls at school, maybe my sister and I can, whatever it would be. It is that realization first, that my sister cares about me. And then when she says, but wait a minute, it is, think about what would you think if suddenly now she's saying, but I want you to go help me steal from mom. It's like, wait a minute, no, she didn't do that for that reason at all. She did all that. I bet, wait, my bank was gone. And she was the only one home yesterday. And that's when it went missing, because I put it in the other day and she was the one, and I bet, and look, she's got, and again, she would start be putting all of that together as well. That's where it comes in. Think about any time you ever realize something where you go in thinking one thing and thinking, something else. Like if you've ever had a situation with a significant other who you suddenly discovered was cheating on you, think about all of those tells that were there before that you read one way and now you hear something else. It's that kind of aha moment. That's what you're looking for. And again, I would look for it in any book that you're reading, because you'll find it all over the place. That's what we come for, seeing that penny drop, that moment in which a character goes from believing one thing to, based on what's happening in the world, realizing that that belief wasn't true, and now they come away believing something else. And they do, in a different example, which I don't have time to go over or read, which I'll often read in workshops, is that the character often will go like one where a little girl realizes her parents are sending her off to sleepaway camp, and she thinks, I don't want to go, and I'm going to tell them, and they're going to miss me so much, and they'll want me to stay. And she overhears them being very happy about the fact that she's going, because now they can have some time by themselves. And she's crushed, and she starts to think, oh my gosh, well, maybe they don't love me enough. Maybe when they said they loved me before, they really didn't. Maybe if I don't do what they want me to do, maybe they won't love me now and they'll send me away. Maybe I can't trust anybody. So she looks like into the past and reevaluates the way she thought her parents felt about her based on what she's learned. And then she looks into the future about, well, wait a minute, if this is true and I don't act a certain way, they might, go off and never come back. I better only do what they want me to do. And then the deeper conclusion that character draws is, yeah, I don't think I'll get close to anybody, because if you can't trust your parents to be there for you, who can you trust? And then that goes forward through her life. But I mean, that's the point. When these things come in with all of us, they don't even just change what we're thinking in the moment. We turn to the past and go, wait, maybe that meant the same way that girl who thought, the nicer someone is to you, the more they're trying to use you. She would very well be able to go back to other situations where her sister seemed nice and now realizing, oh no, wait a minute. The same way you do it with your significant other. It's like, oh no, that wasn't tomato sauce on his collar. Oh no, that wasn't, to use an old trope. I mean, all of a sudden, all those things come clear. And the reason he's doing this now is because he's going to have a big deal at work later. And he, and he doesn't want me to leave him now because of blah, blah, blah. He needs me to babysit the kids while he goes to do whatever. Okay. Instead, I'm going to do X. That's the way we make sense of everything. And that's show, don't tell. It is not external. It is internal. Show me why. Show me the why is the internal struggle that character goes through to try to figure out what to do in that particular scene. Because in every scene, you want your character, your protagonist, to have to make a difficult decision. Even if it's between two good things, difficult decision. Because it's never between a good and a bad thing. It's always between two bads and two goods. Something that has both usually.
Yeah.
That's what you're looking for. And like I said, if you start to look for it, and if you do it with a highlighter, because stories are seductive. Once we're pulled in, I mean, it really does put a timeout biologically on our biology. I mean, you really are there. Again, as I say, it's why people make that mistake of thinking it's about beautiful writing in the plot, because when we're seduced into it, those are the two things we can still see, right? We think it's the beautiful writing that's conveyed the meaning, as if the writing wasn't beautiful, the meaning wouldn't be there. And the truth is, it's the meaning that's made the writing beautiful. It's the opposite. That's what you got to go down to. And often, I mean, frankly, it's one of the things that annoys me the most in the writing world. I think that what is often, it still shocks me it's this way, is dismissed as genre fiction is so much deeper than literary fiction, which I think is often mind-numbingly boring, because it is about, little, I don't know, it's just, I'm happy to think another.
We approve of that view.
Last incendiary thing, or probably I'll say, is that if it was up to me, I think the absolute worst famous literary novel out there is Ulysses. Worst book ever written. Did you ever try to read it?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, it's so bad. It's so bad. It's like all over. And then it's got, toward the end, not that I read the whole thing, but toward the end, it's got something like 15 or 16 pages with no punctuation and all $25 words. It's like, to what end? I mean, story is there. It is a survival mechanism. It is there to teach us something. It is there to inject meaning. It literally mainlines meaning. Mainlines meaning. Story is what changes our minds about stuff. It's the only thing that changes our minds about stuff. If you're not pulled into a story and engaged, I don't know what it is, but I do know it's not a story.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if that's why, particularly romance and the genre fiction, that really is kind of, viewed usually as the most harshly. And I wonder if it's because kind of organically romance writers really do dig into the why. That's very emotion, like that internal drive is very much about the story. And I think possibly that's a little confronting for people, and I'm talking really generalistically here, but I'm wondering if that's kind of really where that kind of almost disdain for the genre can come from in some people.
Yeah, I think it's also a lot of misogyny is really
true. Very true.
A lot of it is misogyny.
Yeah.
The truth is, I mean, the irony is, and this is something that I really was trying to hit hard on in this new book that I have coming out, is that everything we do is driven by emotion, and it's not a bad thing, and people go, yeah, don't get emotional, calm down. And you want to go, dude, calm is an emotion. Anything you feel is an emotion. Everything you do is driven by emotion, not by being rational. I mean, the two things are not in any way, shape, or form two opposites. If you couldn't feel emotion, you couldn't make a single rational decision at all. We unfortunately, based on a certain other gender, I think, has decided that this is what logic is, and a certain gender that, I don't know, might be, I don't know, terrified of emotion maybe, and doesn't allow feel emotion, maybe, not to name what gender that is. But I mean, so they shut themselves off, and I can feel like 4 different emotions, and that is it. And then everything else is shut down.
Mm.
And women are allowed to feel emotion, and if they don't, and so they've taken emotion and they've pushed emotion as if emotion is merely emotional, which is one pitch of emotion, and that is it. And so they're terrified, and made us terrified. Society's terrified of emotion. And yet, when you think about it, what are we actually the most scared of out there? Someone who comes at you and is emotionless, right? That whole thing, like, he came at me, he had dead eyes, no I mean, what would scare you more than that? Like, absolutely. That's why AI doesn't work, I firmly believe, is because it can't feel emotion. So it could never, ever work on that level, because emotion, again, comes from the meaning that we make of our past experience, because emotion is literally biologically what lets you know what's safe and what isn't. That's why we have it, so that we don't have to think it out. It's something happens. In fact, the reason we have memory, just to go on a little bit about neuroscience for a second, the reason we have memory at all is that your amygdala is there, and when something happens that puts us on high alert, good or bad or whatever, your amygdala wakes up and your limbic system comes online, and it's like, oh, this is something I might need to know for future reference. And that memory, that's why we don't remember every single thing we ever did. That memory then sort of gets an evergreen backstage pass to your long-term memory. And it stays there for that reason, because then if you find yourself in a similar situation, it's going to come up and it's going to go, look out, or yay, this is really good. And often, because it's down there, even when it comes up, it doesn't mean you even remember it. It's down now, a lot of it in your, what's known as your cognitive unconscious, which is where, 99.9% of the decisions you make every day are made in your cognitive unconscious, and you just act. But think about anything where you've gone, I'm going to do a list of pros and cons, and then I'll, rationally figure out what to do. It's like, you don't make that decision based on all that rationality. You make that decision based on how it makes you feel at the end of the day. That is how we know. Otherwise, how would you know? You'd flip. That's the whole point. Emotion conveys meaning.
Yeah.
And in a story, if we're not feeling, we're not reading, because there's no meaning to anything. And like I was saying before, the meaning in the story comes from how it's affecting your protagonist, not generically, but in terms of this agenda that they've got, this problem that they're dealing with. But that to solve it, they've got to really deal with this misbelief that has now been relegated down to their cognitive unconscious. They don't even know they believe it necessarily. It's not like they even think it. Or as my son said recently, he's a producer, a movie producer, and we were talking about a script that his company, he was giving notes to the screenwriter, and he said, yeah, it needed more backstory. He said, because what the plot does, he goes, the plot, what happens in the story, makes the unconscious conscious. And I was like, I'm writing that down and stealing it, because that's really and it's really true. It's like, by that time, the misbelief is down in your subconscious. You don't think about it anymore. You don't think of it as a misbelief or even as a belief. It's just like, this is the way the world is, right? This is how the world is. And now something's going to happen that's going to pull it up and force you to go, maybe not. Yeah, it's not how the world is. In fact, maybe by the time you get to the end and you have the new eyes, as was it T.S. Eliot said, the end of our exploring will be to return to the beginning and to see the place for the first time. And that's what happens with those new eyes we get at the end. We look back at the beginning and go, oh, wait, I was misreading all of that. This wasn't what I thought it was.
That's
and when
awesome.
that misbelief hits the dust, now, like I said, they either like it, and I imagine this is true in a lot of romances. It's like in rom-coms, it's that way. Like when the person gets that person they've been after the whole time, and they go, wait, what? I just realized this isn't at all what I wanted, because it doesn't feel the way I thought it would. And then usually they just turn to the other person, and that's the end.
Yeah.
But
That's very true. So it's story is about meaning and emotion. That's what we got for that. Awesome. We are coming up. We have come up to the hour, Lisa. So we can keep you going for the next 3 hours, no problem. But I think we might offend or upset a few people if we keep going. So I'm gonna cut us off there, unfortunately.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us, though. It's been amazing.
Oh, yeah, really,
Been
really
great.
good.
Yep.
We have to get you back one day,
Yes.
Lisa.
Anytime. I
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
Oh, that's very kind.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So where is the best place for people to find you if they're looking to?
It's truly my website. I mean, just, wiredforstory.com. And I have links to most stuff. I admit I'm really bad at any kind of self-promotion. Sometimes I'll give talks and I forget to say I wrote a book. I'll have someone in the audience. These books, it's like, oh yeah, right. Because I just love this stuff so much. I just like talking about it. But that's, that's where I'm based.
Yeah. So go check her out, and also on Creative Live, and Austin has special deals for the shorter courses as well as the big, long, Wired for Story one, which I will recommend. The Emotion one, which is one I did and I totally loved.
And if I could just say also, there's one that's, oh God, what is the 16 things writers need to know? I can't remember what I called it. And they didn't promote it well. And I think it's the best one. And it's got like the lowest number of people who've watched it. And it's because I don't literally understand why. Because I think, no, that's the one that you should, anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So look up that one then.
Hello, whatever. I think that's really good.
Awesome. And where can we be found, Shah?
So we can be found at spargirlspodcast.com and also on Facebook and Twitter. And we will track down the link for that 16 things writers need to know, because I know that Trudy and I are now going to go immediately out and buy that. So we will put that link in the show notes as well. So anybody listening to that, just head along to spargirlspodcast.com.
Awesome. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Amazing.
Yes. Great to meet you.
Hopefully I'll see you guys at some point soon.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's another episode of the Spa Girls podcast. Thank you all for listening, and we will be back again next week. Bye.
Keep well.
Bye.